All right, Feliks Banel joins us now, which we're very excited about because he has this really cool podcast that you guys should all listen to. It's called Unsolved Histories, and you were focusing this season on...
the first season, which was all last fall, October and November, you guys had me on a few times to talk about it. It's called Unsolved Histories, What Happened to Flight 293.
Yep.
It was a civilian airplane chartered by the military to carry 101 people from McChord Air Force Base in Tacoma to Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska. This is 1963. Midway through the flight, something went wrong. We still don't know what. The plane crashed into the Gulf of Alaska. They never recovered any bodies. They never figured out what went wrong. 58 people on that plane were active duty military, meaning their job on that day in the middle of the Cold War was to fly to Alaska on this plane, regardless of who that it was owned by Northwest Airlines and a military charter. But because they were not in active combat, when they disappeared, they just were considered dead. The families got the benefits that you would get. They got they got to do memorial services without bodies there. But if their relatives had disappeared in combat, they would be considered missing in action. Yeah. If you're missing in action, the payoff is that promise the military has made since the Revolutionary War. We leave no one behind. Mm-hmm. Right. If you're missing in action, your family gets updates about whether they're looking for you or not. You get updates. You get invited to an event of the Pentagon every year. You get this big warm embrace of the Department of Defense saying, like, we recognize your sacrifice. We know you don't have a body of your loved one. We may not find them this year, but we might in a few years out. We might spend millions of dollars searching on an atoll in the Pacific or in the mountains somewhere in Europe. But these families, there's about 500 of them, not just on Flight 293, but a bunch of other flights since World War II, they've been ignored. In some cases, 60, 70 years. Their loved ones gone, considered dead, even though they're missing. They're left out of all these other activities. That was something we identified through this podcast, right? I interviewed these different families who'd lost somebody on Flight 293. And then I found this woman named Tanya Anderson-Dell down in Florida whose grandfather disappeared back in the early 50s, before she was even born. She helped me understand that this issue is huge. There's 500 families, approximately, who've lost people on flights like this that weren't combat, but their relatives, their loved ones are just gone. So we send information to different lawmakers. We publicize the podcast. And I learned earlier this week that tomorrow, bipartisan legislation is being introduced by Senator Patty Murray of Washington, Democrat, and Senator Dan Sullivan, Republican of Alaska. That's two ends of the flight, Tacoma to Elmendorf. Bipartisan legislation called the Flight 293 Remembrance Act, which addresses all these concerns, not just for Flight 293, but all these other flights, all those 500 families who've been just bureaucratically left in the dark with their back turned on them by the Defense Department for, in the case of Flight 293, 62 years. We did a 60th anniversary event, and one of the survivors, this guy Greg Barrowman, who lost his brother, he paid for the monument we dedicated at Tacoma. No public dollars involved, and we put this big piece of granite with a big bronze plaque on it, a couple of years ago. This legislation, if it passes, it's got bipartisan support. There's a bunch of veterans groups that support it.
And why wouldn't it pass? Yeah.
Politics are really weird right now. Congress is doing weird things and not doing weird things. Congress is very hard to predict, in my mind. I'm being cautious.
I bet you this passes, yeah.
I really sure hope so, because they're introducing the same legislation in the House. And if it goes through, it means those 500 families, including Greg Barrowman, who lost his 17-year-old brother, Tanya Anderson-Dell, who lost her grandfather in the 50s, they're finally brought in, and that promise is made good, that we leave no one behind. We love you. We recognize the sacrifice you made by giving up your loved one. They weren't in a foxhole. They weren't shooting at another fighter plane. They're on the way to do the work of protecting us in the Cold War, which meant manning the big radar line.
They were on duty, even if they weren't in action.
Duty.
It was a charter flight with military personnel.
And that's signed up.
That's been part of the problem, right? It's because it wasn't a military flight. So it's a commercial airlines issue. They were military people, so it's not commercial. It's a military issue. People have been pinballing it back and forth for these 60 years. In this
and Tanya Anderson-Dell in particular, she's been working on this issue for 25 years. And she said, the Navy would say, oh, ask the Air Force. The Air Force say, ask the Army. She's got sort of circled around her, and no one is willing to step up and take responsibility. And that's why I'm grateful to Senator Murray and Senator Sullivan for realizing that it's a small gesture in a way, in the grand scheme, but it's so meaningful for these families who've been left behind, in the case of Greg Barrowman, 62 years, which his brother disappeared.
It's so cool, and I mean, it is very important, and I'm optimistic that it would pass.
I hope so. I just don't want to jinx it. I don't know. I think, and all these families will weigh in and let their lawmakers know to support it.
What is this? What is that feeling like? Where this was a pet project of yours, and it's just a podcast you're putting out there. You're hoping that people listen to it, and then you find that there's like actual legislation that might be a result of it.
It's been a roller coaster week because, again, I reached out to Murray's office a couple of years ago. I had a conversation with a staffer back in September saying, hey, the podcast is coming. This certain episode is going to lay out all these things we see as an issue. I assumed nothing would happen. I got a call or text on Monday, and this woman called me back. She told me what was going on. I was totally blindsided. I started crying.
Did you really?
I should have brought the tape. I've started rolling tape because I wanted to have the tape of my reaction. Because when you make podcasts, you tape everything, right? Because you want to have that atmosphere and stuff. And I was bawling. And I was telling my wife and daughter about it later. I started crying again. All through the day, Monday, I was having this kind of just emotional roller coaster day about how meaningful this is.
Well, this is something that you have every right and should be very proud of. And on a bigger sense, though, I think what an asset storytelling is, and you do it so well. And you and Aaron Mason have worked on this podcast.
Absolutely, Aaron's been key to this. Yeah,
it's a brilliantly told story, and the way you convinced legislators that this matter was the passion of the families you met coast to coast that have lost loved ones, and the way they have felt left out of any kind of community support, let alone federal support, military support, and the fact that you guys. I mean, this is how valuable good storytelling is, and what you bring to it. And I just congratulations to you. And thank you for the job you did, not just on this one, but every time we come to our resident historian, you know what you care about, what you talk about, and you know about what you bring to the table, and it helps the community understand how. Like it was the Everett waterfront story you told us a week or so ago about how impactful that was historically, and how it's going to be leveled for condos or retail or whatever it might be. And these moments matter to all of us, and especially families who have lost loved
And I don't
ones.
want to blow smoke about this, but in case management is listening, like in Salt Lake City, because I work for KSL Podcast, which is owned by Bonneville, our KIRO's parent company, and our mission, Bonneville's whole mission statement is building up communities and families. And they've let me do that with the storytelling I've done here. Because it's not just about history, it's about the people working to save this old school or the people working to save this thing because they're uniting their community and they're trying to make where they live better. And that's what this should be all about. And that's just like, to have this legislation come out, it's just like, this is just incredible. It blew me away.
Did they call you first when they let you know that they were going to put this legislation through?
Yeah, I got a text from
So did you get a chance to like call some of the people that you've had a relationship with who are connected to the flight?
Yeah, as soon as I got off the phone with the staffer from Murray's office, I reached out. I texted both Greg Barrowman, who lost his brother, and then Tanya Anderson-Dell, without whom I said, you guys have 5 minutes for a quick call? I was more emotional than they were. I had the legislation in front of me, this sort of one pager, and I was trying to read it to them, and they were kind of stunned. Everybody was kind of speechless. Like Tanya was like, I don't know what to say, because she's been trying to do this for 25 years, and she's just gotten pushed away. And Greg is amazing. He was a 7 or 8 year old kid when his brother disappeared, and so he's his whole life. And I have older brothers. I love my older brothers, and he had the same kind of relationship with his brother that I have with mine. And I think how much he suffered. He's a different guy than when I met him 10 years ago when I first interviewed him. I've watched him grow and change through this process of converting grief into action to try to do something to help not just yourself, but all the others who are suffering the same way, not just from this flight, but from all these other flights. It's been a healing journey for these people, and it's for me too. I mean, I've matured and grown through this, and it's incredible. I love this work.
This is such a great story. What a great happy ending. I hope it passes
hope
through.
It passes. Yeah,
it's moving in the right direction.
Reach out if you have reach out to your member of Congress. I know they're busy right now.
Yeah, they're getting calls at Congress
fires and stuff.
Yeah, but
reach out and let them know you support the Flight 293 Remembrance Act for all of us. We all owe this to the people who make the sacrifice by losing their loved ones in support of protecting the Constitution and protecting our sovereignty.
But honoring the commitment made to those who serve and their families.
Could we bring the national anthem playing in the background now we wrap the segment up here, please?
Nick, what are you doing there, buddy? You missed them. What a moment.
I really appreciate it. You guys have been really nice about letting me come on and talk about the podcast all the last several months, and I'm grateful to you for helping spread the word.
We're grateful to you,
very
Felix.
much.
We're genuinely interested, and we think it's important.
It's been a real remote instruction day kind of day for me today here with you guys.
I hope you mean that in a good way.
Yes, of
course.
I thought it was an insult. I'm so glad.
I take everything as a compliment.
I love that.